Welcome to EconTalk, part of the Library of Economics and Liberty. I'm your host, Russ Roberts of George Mason University and Stanford University's Hoover Institution. Our website is econtalk.org, where you can subscribe, find other episodes, comment on this podcast, and find links and other information related to today's conversation. Our email address is mail@econtalk.org. We'd love to hear from you. My guest today is Nassim Taleb, author of Fooled by Randomness and The Black Swan, two rather remarkable books about the role of chance in our lives. Nassim, welcome to EconTalk.
Hi.
Now, Nassim, I understand your full-time job now is reading and living in your library. How's that going?
You get sometimes bored, so you have to have some business activities and have a good travel agent. Other than that, it's not bad.
How many books are in your library? Roughly.
I think that a number has been dropping over the years.
Why?
Because the replacement. I mean, you get rid of stuff that you change moods. You get rid of stuff, and my replacement rate has been not keeping up with my emptying it out.
I'm sorry.
I have thousands, I'd say.
But not 30,000.
No, not like Umberto Eco. Nothing near Umberto Eco.
Now, you say at the end of Fooled by Randomness, and this is a quote, "We favor the visible, the embedded, the personal, the narrated, and the tangible. We scorn the abstract." End of quote. Explain what you mean by that. It's the major theme of really both books.
It's mostly I use that as what I realized at the end of the book. Okay, The Black Swan, the Fooled by Randomness. That hey, what am I all about? And so this I'm thinking, how can I link everything I've been thinking about for the last X number of years, X number of decades, okay, in one single topic, one single theme. And then I realized, hey, it is the confirmation bias.
And explain what that is to
and
our
I'll tell
listeners.
you, the Black Swan is a problem where you tend to believe that all swans are white because you've never seen a black swan. Okay? So you rule out the black swan, and you rely on confirmation, which is okay if you're dealing with birds. Okay? The confirmation bias is simply not taking seriously what you don't see, and taking more seriously what you see, which in a very primitive environment does a very good job to get you out of trouble.
But in less primitive environments,
in a primitive environment, say for example, if you don't see a huge elephant, you're okay. Okay, odds are there's not going to be a huge elephant. Now, in a non-primitive environment, you will have to wait much longer before drawing a consequence, because the random variables we have in the real world are more and more what we call fat-tailed. Fat-tailed means dominated by a small number of observations. Okay, and I will explain it later with my dichotomy: mediocristan versus extremistan.
Why don't you actually talk about that dichotomy now? So you talk about how there are two countries that we live in often at the same time: mediocristan and extremistan. So what is mediocristan?
Great. So let's play the thought experiment. That's my classical thought experiment. If you collect 1,000 people from planet Earth, and only members of planet, people from the human race, not outside the human race, and not outside planet Earth.
No giraffes. No
giraffes, and nobody outside planet Earth. Okay, you have 1,000 people. And make sure you have, say, no more than a Frenchman, okay, because it can be annoying to non-Frenchmen. And also no more than one person from Texas, and you can put them together if you want. So
you are so wicked.
Sorry?
You are so wicked.
Okay, so you can have a good sample of the world's population. And you put them all on a scale, okay? Now, think of the heaviest human being you can find, or you can think of, okay? That can still be called a human being, of course, okay? And add that person to the scale. How much of the total will that person represent?
Trivial.
trivial, half a percent. Okay, so and if your sample goes to 10,000, the exception, basically, that heavy person is not going to wane. Okay, so literally, okay, the exceptional, okay, is inconsequential. Okay, in a class of random variables like weight. Whereas your sample becomes very large, okay, no single observation can impact the total. Well, everything in statistics is based on that. It's called the law of large numbers.
Yep.
Or everything in statistics that people tend to learn. Okay? The law of large numbers. As your sample becomes large, or is sampling everything, okay, you converge to some number. The average becomes very stable. Okay?
And as you talk about in the book,
yes.
we know this. Those of our listeners who have survived a course on statistics. This is the normal distribution. It's the Gaussian distribution. And poor Mr. Gauss comes in for a little bit of pounding indirectly in your book because of just his name being attached to it. I really like Mr. Gauss. But
I love Mr. Gauss. Okay.
But we learn a world about probability from Gauss's world, which is this world of nice, smooth, normally distributed stuff, where, as you point out, outliers, so-called outliers, are unimportant because they don't move the mean at all. That's
pretty much the point. And it's not just the Gaussian, or I call the Gaussian family, broad family of the Gaussian, or something that also called the Gaussian basin. Okay?
And that's Mediocristan.
That is Mediocristan. So literally, Mediocristan, the best example is, fortunately or unfortunately, weight. Okay? How many calories you consume on, say, the day where you're going to eat the most, say, Thanksgiving? How many calories I'm going to have that day?
5,000 maybe, if you really have a good day. Maybe 10, actually.
10,000, okay. You consume what, about 800,000 calories a year? I consume about 800,000 calories a year. Okay. It's not going to make, a single day is not going to make you overweight, which is excellent news.
Sort of.
The problem is that no single day is going to make you poor, going to make you thin, okay?
Right.
So that class of variables is something that we tend to encounter in a primitive environment, okay? Now, the primitive environment has other complicated variables, but, that's mostly what you see, okay? The size of the elephant you're going to encounter is not going to exceed some amount, okay? Now, take the very same sample of 10,000 people, or of 1,000 people, and add to that sample the richest human you can think of, who can still be called a human, of course. All right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure you're going to select the gentleman in Seattle.
Yes, take Bill Gates.
Okay, so
worth about $50 billion.
Okay.
Although I explained to my children that his wealth is not quite as exciting as that, because it's not so liquid. But he's a wealthy man.
Okay, he's a wealthy man, and remember that you're selecting people from the. You're going to have people from Texas, but you're going to also have someone from Botswana in there.
Yep.
Okay. So, I don't know what the net worth is going to be like, but definitely much less than a rounding error in his computation of his net worth.
Right. So unlike weight, income is not normally distributed.
Exactly. So, not just that, but it's dominated by the exceptional.
Yes.
Okay. So here we have two classes of random variables, and I figured that out when I started trading currencies.
Because?
Okay. Because in currencies, the main example is that of, and I started really encountering these random variables. I say in a book that I saw it in the crash of '87, but it was when I started trading in '85. So in '86 we had a couple of abrupt shocks. Okay, and an old trader told me the story of the German currency, the Reichsmark, or whatever mark it was called.
The Deutschmark, I think. Well, no, then it
was before the Deutschmark. Okay.
Yeah.
And that currency went from 3 to $1 to 4.3 trillion to $1.
Slight inflation.
Okay, so you can realize that the variability of that currency, everything in the history of currencies is going to be dominated by that example. Okay,
yeah.
And it's not uncommon. You see it with a lot of things. I mean, I've seen interest rate go to in the Irish punt in the early 1990s go from something like 12% to 6,000%. In a few minutes, okay.
Where was that?
During the we had devaluation in 1992. Okay, during that period.
Okay.
I mean, I've seen interest rates experience 50 sigmas, no problem. 50 standard deviations, no problem. Okay, while people were calling them Gaussian. Mm-hmm. So now we have two domains. Okay. Now look at the second domain, extremistan, where the exception is quite important. and look around you, okay? Whether in economic life, okay, artistic success, wars, okay, impact of reputation, you see.
Baseball.
Sorry?
Baseball.
Baseball seems to me that the talent, but given that it's a tournament, you have that effect in the income, okay? Yeah. The income of baseball players, probably, if you take the total income, it would be dominated by a small number of people.
Yep.
Okay. But effectively, our physical abilities are a sort of Gaussian.
Yes.
See? Are not. I mean, as a combination. Gaussian with slight fat tails.
Yes.
No, but nothing like extremistan. Okay. Now you realize that take the book business. That if you have 6,000 novels, serious novels, published in the English language every year, between 5 and 20 books are going to dominate the sales. Okay.
Yes. Most of them
More
written.
Than half the, sorry.
Most of them written by a woman in England with the initials JKR. If you pick the right year, and you call it a novel, you said serious novels, but yes, a handful will dominate the sales.
A handful, no, but even outside the outside, I'm taking her out of the sample. When I looked at the numbers, it was counted as a children, as a children book. But if you include her, of course, no, she's, So you have that. I mean, in cultural life, you have in anything that is sort of constructed by us. Okay, so you have that effect. Okay. Now, I'm going to go back to that we scorn the abstract, okay? That notion of scorning the abstract. Scorning the abstract, scorning what you don't see, works very well in mediocristan. Because in mediocristan, typically, what you see is pretty much what's there. Why? Because you don't need a very large sample to have to get acquainted with the total properties.
In fact, about 30 is often pretty good.
Exactly.
You don't need 1,000, 10,000, 100,000.
Yeah, that's the rule of thumb. Okay, so and that's also we're going to see when I had chatted with you, you thought that Food by Randomness was about behavioral finance. I want to have nothing to do with behavioral finance. Okay, because one of the mistakes they make is they say, well, people tend to make a mistake of allocating 1 over n. Okay, if you give them 100. Items, they tend to allocate non-rationally, not using the Gaussian. Okay, my rebuttal is that it's the only rational thing we do. Right?
What do you mean by that?
If you give people a lot of stocks to pick from, they're not going to use portfolio theory recommends, because based on a Gaussian, a certain number of stock will sample the total. But effectively, if you give people stocks, they won't be aware of it. They're going to have as many as they have in front of them, and that's called the 1 over n heuristic.
They take way too many.
They will take way too many.
More than they need to be representative of the sample.
Exactly. And when I saw a criticism by saying this is irrational, I realized, I looked at it and I said, oh my God, this is the only rational thing we do. Right?
So let me just make sure I understand this. You're saying that if in a Gaussian world, the so-called normal mediocristan world, a small sample is representative, and there'd be no reason to sample the full sample. It's just a waste. It's
exactly, and also because your returns degrade. So you take a good sample that has of quality stocks, because as you're going to increase diversification, you're going to degrade your expected return supposedly by having a larger sample.
But your point is that in many examples in life, you want the bigger sample, even though it's irrational in a Gaussian mediocristan world. In an extremistan world, the tails might be where the action is, and you're wise to take a much bigger sample.
Exactly. And if you want the very simplest evidence, take how many stocks we have listed today. We have close to 10,000 stocks listed in America. Okay. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of stocks that went out of business. Okay, either way by merging, all right, or by leaving us, the old traditional way of going bust. Okay, so many more than 10,000 went into that pool. Okay, the OEX, which is the top 100 stocks, it can represent between 35 and 65% of capitalization, depending on when you look at it. Mm-hmm. Depending on what a big stock does.
Sure.
Okay, so here you have 10,000. Okay, you take 10,000 stocks. Okay, it's going to be dominated over a long time by 100 stocks. You realize that picking 30 isn't going to give you a good protection from sampling error.
Right.
You see, this is a recommendation to basically index. If you're going to be in stocks, which I'm not, if you're going to be in stocks, I am in the markets, but in very speculative things like venture capital. But if you're going to be in stocks, you'd better index. Okay, that's my.
We just had we just had John Bogle on EconTalk recently, who is the premier founder and defender of indexing. And as you point out in your book, it's kind of an interesting tension because indexing can lead to a greater sense of serenity than you're entitled to, but relative to many other stock activities, it is much more serene. It is going to be the safer place, but it's not as safe, perhaps, as you think it is. Let's talk about that a little bit, not with the stock example, but let's continue on with Extremistan.
Okay.
The point that I think we want to make sure the listeners understand is the black swan point in these kind of settings where the unexpected event that you have no past experience with. It's not just the risk that we normally associate with the stock market, which is it can go up and down, or the risk we associate with a whole variety of things in life, but the risk that is unknown.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're invested in the stock market, if you depend on the stock market, if you have neighbors who are likely to get rich, then your risk here is sometimes missing on a big stock, okay?
Say that again?
Your risk is not necessarily losing money in the stock market.
Mm-hmm.
Your risk can be missing on a big opportunity.
Of course.
And if you miss that opportunity, someone who didn't get Google or someone who didn't get YouTube is missing on a lot of things. I would put one little twist to that indexing story is I don't like to index with S&P 500. I'd rather have an indexing that's more weighted in 1/n way.
More like the Wilshire 5,000.
Yeah, there's something more
Russell
1/n
index,
than. But I'm not too much involved in markets from that perspective, so I'm not aware of all the nuances.
Okay, well let's move on. So we've been talking about Mediocristan. Let's talk about Extremistan.
Yes.
The fat tails and the black swan that get you.
Okay, so let me describe that defect we have. Okay, is that we tend to think that even physically, all right, it's more than intellectually, all right, physically, that if you make money for 3, 4, 5 days, that you know what, you're a profitable person. You're going to ignore the possibility of a large loss, okay, even in a Gaussian world. So, and regardless of your sophistication, even if you're a skilled statistician, when it will come to trading decisions, you're going to be influenced by something Kahneman calls the law of small numbers, belief in the law of small numbers, okay? So we already have a defect, even in Gaussian, you see, of making inferences based on very small data.
Someone, for example, who goes to the racetrack or even to the casino and has a few good days in a row might be fooled by randomness into thinking that they're skilled at what they're doing.
Exactly. I mean, I feel that myself. Listen, I wrote The Black Swan. I also wrote Fooled by Randomness, okay, in which I say, hey, you shouldn't pay attention to random data. But whenever I'm involved, and this is why I can no longer look at the screen. Whenever I look at a screen, I automatically make, without noticing, you see, your moods is not determined by your consciousness. Your moods are determined by very shallow inputs from your environment that you don't necessarily notice. Okay, so I make that mistake of taking these things seriously. Okay, so taking data. So this is what I call the confirmation bias, where we tend, in Mediocristan you can confirm. You can say, okay, what I've seen is sufficient. Now, let me give you the best example of an error that we tend to make of thinking we are in Mediocristan, behaving as if we were in Mediocristan, when in fact we are in Extremistan. And that mistake is sort of like how I start with the third chapter of The Black Swan, the fourth chapter, I think, is with the story of U.S. banks. American banks lost in the summer of 1982 more money than they ever made before. Plus one block.
Cumulative, you mean?
Cumulative.
Yeah.
They lost everything. Okay, American banks. Now, in the Black Swan, I say, if you ask someone to describe a banker, they will tell you that these people are not necessarily good looking, dress very well, and they are rather boring and dull. Okay.
Because they're so conservative. They're so cautious.
Exactly. So what they do is they tend to hide what I say randomness under the rug or hide it from themselves. So basically, they're completely fooled by small sampling. They live in extremist and say, oh, you know what, I have a good year. I've had 2 good years, 3 good years. It's not sufficient because you have a small probability of a very large loss. Then their method is not of inference, is not adapted to the environment they're in. And that is the tragedy of a lot of financial markets, okay, in which you often, finance, is effectively a very fat-tailed domain, and you often pay people an annual bonus, like bankers, okay, say, oh, you did very well. You didn't have any bankruptcy, you did very well, okay? So particularly when you lend internationally, when all these bankruptcy lumped it all in one, okay, it all happens in one block. So we have a mismatch between the time taken to really see the statistical properties and the time people use to make a qualitative ranking of the person's performance.
What I like about the treatment you give this issue in the Black Swan is the pervasive nature of this problem way beyond financial markets. So, for example, the use of data generally to make an empirical case is often enormously oversold. Let me ask the question this way. You call yourself, I think, a skeptical empiricist, which is how I would describe myself as well. Don't just give me the narrative. Don't just tell me ex post why something makes sense. Give me a prediction that you can live by, that you can hold up as a real proof of the argument you're making. So we demand data. Because we understand that data are hard often, but of course people use data in incredibly deceptive, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, in incredibly deceptive ways to give their narratives an air of scientism, a dismissive term that Hayek uses,
yes.
An air of scientism that is not scientific. So many social issues in the world today, people invoke data to give their stories a rigor that they don't really have, and I think that's an incredibly important lesson.
Yeah. So let me show you the development of this idea in both books. Okay. In the Black Swan, I discuss something called the narrative fallacy, where basically you can look at a series of events and invent a narrative that fits them, and a sort of ex post explanation. Okay. Ex post, it looks brilliant. Ex ante, visibly, it doesn't work. Okay,
yeah,
so
there's no ex ante in these stories. It's always ex post.
All ex post, but because what happens is that you select what I call, you have a prospective inability to see the Black Swan, but a retrospective ability to weave a causal link.
Yep.
Okay, so this is pretty much the problem of hindsight bias.
Yep.
That was examined by Fischoff and all these people. And here I said that the Black Swan is a severe problem of hindsight bias because people seem, after the fact, to think that they predicted the Black Swan. So the narrative fallacy also is very linked to the confirmation bias. The narrative fallacy, we are quite suckers for stories. So we like to find a story, and ex post we have that. Okay. Now, let's move into statistics. I was 3 weeks ago. I was in San Francisco and at a meeting of the American Association of the National of Science. Okay, where a gentleman called Ioannidis showed us data showing that 80% of epidemiological studies fail to replicate in real life.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
This is.
Let's say that again. 80% of epidemiological studies. So these are studies looking at so-called causal health effects of this environmental factor, or this food, or this medicine. This, right? That's what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Are not replicatable, meaning that when people try to replicate them, they don't turn out to hold up.
Exactly, which shows you exactly the difference between our ability to predict, okay, and our ability to post-dict. So what these people did is, what people with all these statistical data do is process a lot of information.
Yes.
And they're going to find some kind of accidental relationship that will be, you see, used as a proof, quote unquote, okay, of a link between, say, smoking and breast cancer. They even found a study showing that smoking lowers your risk of breast cancer, because in some cohort it did. Okay.
Right. Once.
So you have, okay, so this is called non-experimental knowledge. This is called simply statistical knowledge. So what it looks like, and that was what I predicted, okay, when I started getting involved in this idea. I said, the more data we are going to have, okay, the worse our statistical knowledge of the world is going to be.
It's a very unintuitive idea, and I like the way, one of the ways you talk about it in the books are, the more you read of the newspaper,
yes,
the dumber you get.
Exactly. That is, there's another also thing about processing information.
Not because newspapers are full of errors, but because the wealth of information, the profusion, along with the narratives that the paper is filled with, are just not informative.
But there is another. It's linked to the confirmation bias. Let me tell you how I link it. When I provide you with data, okay, you are going to produce a lot of theories. Once you have a theory in your head, you're going to just look for confirmation.
Yeah, that's deep.
You see? So this is a problem of the confirmation bias. Let me give you an example why it's biological. I found a paper written in 1960-something by Brunner and Potter. A seminal paper for me, but of course not very noticed. Where if I showed you the picture of a dog, okay, a very blurred picture of a dog, okay, you wouldn't see a dog, okay, it's blurred.
Okay.
So I'm going to show it to you and show it to someone else, okay? I'm going to increase the resolution, okay, in 10 cranks for you, all right?
Okay, it's going to get sharper and sharper.
It's going to get sharper and sharper, up to a point, some degree of clarity, okay? Now, if I do it in 10 cranks for you, okay, you won't see the dog, all right? But if I do it at the same time to someone else, bring it to the same same resolution, okay?
Okay.
Bring it to the same level of clarity, someone else, but in 5 steps instead of 10. The person is more likely
because the 10 level person is seeing something else along the way.
Exactly, because you're going to produce 10 theories or 9 theories, okay? Whereas the other person is going to produce 4 theories. Okay.
Well, my favorite example of this in current life is we're having a very cold spring here in the Washington, D.C. area, and I actually said to a friend that this was obviously evidence of global warming. I was being facetious, but she agreed. She said, yeah, global warming messes up the weather, so you get uncharacteristically cold springs as an example of global warming. So she's confirming her theory with all data. All data confirms global warming. If it's cold, it's global warming. If it's hot, it's global warming. If it rains a lot, it's global warming. If we have a lot of hurricanes, global warming. If we don't have any, global warming. It's a extreme result.
Yeah, this I discussed with this notion of linearity, nonlinearity, okay, and I brought a philosophical problem called the riddle of induction, okay, which is a very complex idea, but in it I show you the following. If you're using a linear model, okay, your degrees of freedom are not very high, okay, you have basically 1 or 2, okay, either you're minimizing on least square or mean deviation, okay, so basically if I give you a series of points and you want to make a projection, there's only 1 and 1 line that will minimize the errors, okay? So you're going to get 1 line. You can project in 1 line. The problem is if I tell you let's use nonlinear models, you can have an infinity of possible models, each one with an infinity of parameterization, all right?
And the problem is we like linear models because they're simple. And often that's
enough.
But sometimes not wrong, right?
Well, sometimes not wrong, but typically wrong. The problem, again, is mediocristan, extremistan, is that linear... let me tell you the tragedy of extremistan, is that it's nonlinear, and odds are we're going to come up with the wrong model, okay? So your model error increases in extremistan. And this I show you, I discuss in a book with the example of the forward and backward problems. Okay.
Explain.
Let me tell you the forward and backward problem, which is typically, which is another mistake. They're all linked to the same error in a way, but but this one's a little special. Okay, if I have an ice cube on the floor, okay, and I ask you to predict how the little bit of puddle of water is going to be like, you will probably come up with an idea of how step 2 will look like. Okay,
when it melts.
Sorry?
When it melts.
Exactly, after it melts. Okay. Now, if I show you water on the floor, trying to figure out what it came from, you can have an infinity of...
Slightly harder.
Much harder. Okay. Now, it's the same thing when you go for models. If I have a theory, okay, you can project from the theory. But if you have data, you have so many theories, okay, that can fit that data. And that is tragic, okay? I mean, it's tragic if you use conventional the methods that we've been trained to use, and methods that are encouraged, and methods that you learn when you get into theoretical social science with a lot of theories, okay? But it's not a big deal if you like rules of thumb, and if you don't like to make big theories, and if you most of my book is about medicine. If you use the methods of the empirical medicine, okay, the 2nd and 3rd century empirical medicine, okay, stick to facts, don't make big claims, and try to use the minimum amount of theories.
I want to come back to the epidemiological result that we talked about earlier, because there's an interesting parallel in economics.
Yes.
You talked about a paper you saw that 80% of the studies are wrong, and that there's an inherent bias in these so-called scientific studies, whether they're in medicine or whether they're in economics, because if you find nothing, it's very hard to publish it. So you spend a lot of time adding variables, trying other things. And in economics, Ed Leamer at UCLA pointed this bias out, and it's what I like about it is it goes back to an old professor of mine, George Stigler, who said that when he was a young man or youngish man, and you had a theory and you wanted to test it, you might run 3 or 4 statistical analyses called regression in economics and statistics to try to fit a line or a curve to the data. So you spent a lot of time thinking about what belonged in that model, because running a regression analysis in the old days took hours and hours and hours of very painful hand calculations using some kind of primitive calculator, whereas today you could run hundreds of regressions, hundreds of different statistical models because of the increased power of computing, and you managed to convince yourself, strangely enough, that the ones that came out with significant results must have been the good models. The ones that didn't work out, those were not specified correctly. And, of course, they're also the ones that won't get published typically. So we have this tremendous bias. We're fooled by randomness. It's a wonderful example of your general thesis, that we're fooled by randomness. We're generating these numerical analyses, and we select the ones that confirm our bias, and we ignore the ones that do not. Leamer's paper made a little splash and then was quietly pushed under the rug, as you say. It's not commonly invoked in empirical work, which is a shame.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these things have been discovered and rediscovered over time, and people don't pay attention to them because, of course, you guys are Hayekian, and I think that your opinion about civil servants, that there's a self-serving element in civil service. Okay, you also find that self-serving elements in disciplines. You see?
Yes, you do.
But let me I have an idea I'd like to discuss here.
Yeah, sure.
Another prediction that's very interesting that I did not put in a book, because the Black Swan is more about medicine than it is about economics. Okay, so I didn't put a lot of economic example linked to economic life. If you have say 1,000 traders, okay, you're bound to have 3 or 4 mega spurious winners, okay, after 10 years, okay.
Just by pure randomness, or by what?
By pure randomness,
okay.
No skills, okay. Right. So of course,
dart throwers.
They may have more or less skills. You're going to encounter a certain number of spurious winners and tails, okay?
Yes.
And these are the ones who will attract capital and displace the people who are, can be spurious losers or just regular people, okay? People who reveal their own properties are going to be completely swamped by these people, okay?
Right.
Because we tend to look for the high performers. The problem we have today just like with medicine, okay, is that you have so many traders, you have so many people involved in the markets, okay, that tail, okay, that what I call the super tail, okay, the stellar winners, is going to be linear to the number of participants, which is huge today.
Right.
Which means that if you want to start a career in finance today, okay, it's close to hopeless. Even if you have a great ex-ante amount of skills, because as you said, you're going to be swamped by a high number of spurious winners who are going to displace you and put you out of business.
So I want to let's generalize that to what I think is one of the more provocative ideas in both books, which is when you see, let me say it the way you say it, a good dentist, a dentist who makes a lot of money is probably pretty good at being a dentist. A trader who makes a lot of money on in a financial market may or may not be a good trader, may be just lucky.
Yes.
And the way I understand your reading of that evidence is when asked, is this person who is very successful in financial markets, is this person skilled? Your answer is, I don't know. Is that correct? That would be the correct way to summarize, right? You would not rule out the possibility.
You could not rule out. I mean, there are tricks where you can reduce the amount of uncertainty, but you can never say is 100% skilled, and you can never say this guy's 100% an idiot.
But we tend to reward all successful people with the crown of skilled.
Exactly. It's the same. We reward them the same way, and this is not. I mean, this took me to a lot of disciplines. I mean, it took me a lot of areas of research. I'm mostly interested in religion now, but so basically, we are more likely to mistake the random for non-random than to mistake the non-random for random.
Because of our behavioral biases built into it.
Because of everything. Behavioral bias and masquerading as science very often, like with statistics. Okay, statistics is a great example of a pseudoscience, okay, that plays on our, I mean, statistics is largely, not all statistics, of course, but pseudoscience, playing on our desires to be suckers for certainties.
Yeah, we do. It's an interesting tension in the book that you don't talk about, which is you want us to think about extremistan. We have a tendency to force all the world into mediocristan, into the normal distribution.
Yes.
And we just take a small sample and I can sleep well at night. And one of the themes of your book is, you really shouldn't sleep so well at night because the level of risk involved in your life isn't as easily captured by the measures that you think because the tails are very fat. They're not as thin as they are in the Gaussian normal world.
Yeah, but I sort of say no. I say do what I'm doing, okay?
Which is
I sleep very well at night because I don't have a lot of downside exposure and I have positive exposure to the extreme events.
Right, but you're in a special case, and I have to.
Anyone can be in that case.
No, right? I have to quibble with you because that's good advice for somebody who has wealth or who is financially comfortable. If you want to build wealth, if you want to save money, if you're 25 years old. That advice is very
then I have a variant of the advice. Okay, my point is that we don't know downside risks. Okay, and
Agreed.
I break the world in two categories. All right, investments. Okay, I say in investments or in decision making, any form of decision. Let's take investments. Okay, you have investments that are prone to negative black swans, namely banking and reinsurance. You have investments that are neutral to the black swan. Okay. And you have investments that are prone to positive black swans, like biotech or certain classes of biotech, of course, book publishing, stuff like that.
Right.
Okay. So where the random variables can hit you, okay, like when I wake up in the morning, okay, I make sure that when I wake up in the morning that if I go down on Google News, if I go down to my study and check Google News, all right, that as far as my financial or investment, not my emotional investment, okay?
Right.
My financial, okay, I want that any big headline on Google News, all right, okay,
yeah,
I want it to either be neutral, all right, or immensely positive. Okay?
Or immensely positive.
Exactly.
Sure.
So this is how I organize my life. Okay, so I sleep very well at night. You see, of course, it carries some costs, but I sleep very well at night. And in there, I put chapter 13, okay, which I mean, because people kept telling me, I got your point, Taleb, I get your point, but what should I do? Okay, in chapter 13, I have a how-to manual, all right?
Right.
And in it, I tell people sometimes people tend to look at what people call risks, all right, are often not risky, and what people call risky and not risky are often risks. Like, for example, if you use a Markowitz or you use any of this junk science, okay, to say, okay, I want to have a medium risk portfolio. Your portfolio is very prone to model error, okay, so you can have a black swan in it, okay? If you take the same average risk by putting 80% of your cash in treasury bills, okay, and hire 2 security guards and hire someone to spy on the security guards, all right, okay?
Yeah.
And put the bills on a bank, okay, and whatever you want. What I'm saying is the highest amount of safety you can get for these 80% of your portfolio. And for 20%, take all the risks you can, okay? Now, the average risk, okay, would be the same as in a previous case, all right? Your upside would be huge, and you'll have literally no downside below negative 20%, okay? Yeah. Or 80% or 90%. It's called the barbell. So there is a superiority to the barbell. Is it priced in? I'm not that sure, okay?
Yeah.
That was my idea. Collect as many positive black swans. But you could do that in private life. Well, I say, okay, try to play the card of serendipity, okay? How? Well, go to parties, right? Live in New York City where you go to parties. You go to parties, you run into someone. If you're an academic and you're craving ideas, you may run into someone who's going to give you a great idea, okay? Someone slightly drunk will give you a good idea, you see?
Right. You don't want to live in a place. You want the fat tails. You want the small chance of something fascinating happening rather than the dull mediocrity of the comfortable, serene life.
I know I like comfortable serene, but I want a maximum exposure to what I call envelope of serendipity. Okay. And I tell people, well, if you want a comfortable, serene life, or if you're autistic, can't go to parties, okay, send your associates. Okay?
Yeah.
So now I have one thing that's quite central we didn't speak about. All right? Okay. We spoke about the confirmation bias. Okay. Mm-hmm. And its ramifications. Okay. Of course, we have inference from small samples, fooled by statistics, fooled by randomness, fooled by performance, and a lot of stuff that enter that category, and also the dichotomy, mediocristan, extremistan. But the central idea here I have, which you guys should like, is as follows. I'm a little more extreme than Hayek, and it's far more extreme, is the following. Whenever someone looks at a dog, okay, they have some trouble accepting that this animal is not the product of some design, but the product of a random process in which only the upper bound was selected. Or roughly, the upper bound was selected. Okay. Over time, and this is what you got. You got a dog. Okay. Right. All right. You have that random process. Okay, got you the dog. Okay. But when they look at a car or a computer or a laser, they're not likely. Okay. Even those who have no difficulties accepting that a dog is a product of a random process.
Right.
Okay, even those will have difficulty accepting when they look at a car that's a product of the same random process, actually even worse random process, right?
Sort of. So explain.
Okay. Because of hindsight bias, we have the feeling that when you read the history of economic life, scientific discoveries, and all that, you have the impression that it all came from design. And my theory is as follows. We are not good at knowing. We are not good at planning. We're not good at forecasting. We're just good at doing. So it's a classical techne episteme from Aristotle. Okay?
Okay.
So we are not good at knowing. Okay. Now, of course, there's a Hayekian element and says that he thinks collectively we're good at knowing, but not individually. All right? Right. But there's this techne versus episteme tension. Is that I have the feeling that we're fooled by our own skills. Now let's run history backwards instead of looking at history the way we read it today, with so it looks like everything we were looking for this and found it. We were looking for this cue. Let's look at history, and the history of medicine, history of scientific discovery is going to be depressing. Okay, most of what people were looking for, okay, they did not find. most of what they found they were not even looking for.
Correct.
Okay? And a very small number of people recognize that. Of course, that was the core of my masters, the people I want to promote, is the skeptical empiricist. I'm not skeptical empiricist in the modern sense, like, say, Popper and stuff like that. Skeptical empiricist in the sense of Menodotus of Nicomedia, okay? And Sextus Empiricus, and who are the central people in the Black Swan. Okay? And for them, medicine was a stochastic process. You discover the things by doing, you have no theories, have the minimum amount of theories, okay? And really, as little as you can. Theories are, like, you guys look at government as like medicine, okay? Typically bad medicine, okay? Medicine that's worse for the patient than can be, you know,
right.
can be more harmful to the patient than can be helpful, okay? And they look at theories the same way, okay? And
right.
it seems to, okay, so let me take an example. Let's take the three most consequential discoveries of the last 50 years, okay? Whenever you ask people, typically the first thing they're going to tell you is the internet, the computer, okay, and the laser, okay? And look at how these things developed. One is nobody, the laser was not built for eye surgery.
Correct.
It was built just for someone who wanted to show off, okay? So I think that engineers are autistic people who just like being engineers. And they do a lot of things. Because of we don't notice, okay, what I call the cemetery of discoveries, things that discoveries that didn't go anywhere, okay? You notice
right.
those without either helpful for other application, helpful for other discoveries, okay, or helpful to do something called scientific research, okay?
Well, like the example you give in the book of penicillin. Penicillin was just some mold that Fleming found. It wasn't what he was looking for. Probably the most significant health discovery of the 20th century, and it was an accident.
Well, I mean, we are discovering more and more things, okay, were accidents. And we have a controlled experiment, you see. The best controlled experiment is the National Cancer Foundation. National Cancer
Institute. Sorry? I think it's the National Cancer Institute.
NCI,
yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
You know that the NCI really didn't. They went through thousands. I read that in a book that I unfortunately I was unable to cite in the Black Swan because it came out last month. Phenomenal book by a gentleman called Mayers, and he really went through the data.
And what did he find?
The NCI was founded, spent billions of dollars. They went through 130,000 compounds systematically. Mm-hmm. Discovered almost nothing. And the biggest discovery in cancer was from mustard gas, or from a side effect of mustard gas. Mm-hmm. And this is how they got chemotherapy. Hmm. So here you have a nice controlled experiment of you have in the directed research 130,000 compounds, okay. Top-down research, okay,
right.
versus completely random discoveries. And typically in medicine, okay, just doing research is a good thing because you don't know what you're going to find. So you might as well give yourself the illusion that you're looking for chemotherapy. You may discover a headache medicine, you see?
Right.
We know that Viagra, was discovered from other medicines. And even now, look at the Genentech, the macular degeneration drug, okay?
But Nassim, you might be being fooled by randomness and the confirmation bias here. I mean, you've chosen a handful of medicines that were accidental, penicillin.
No, that's different. It's not confirmation bias. You're taking, how do you avoid the confirmation bias? You take everything, the pool, okay?
Right.
You take the big impacting things, you list them, and see if they came.
Right, okay? But some of them, I suspect, did come from people looking for the particular thing they were looking for, right?
This I doubt. I mean, of course, we found things that we were looking for, of course, and also you can also change your research a little bit and then backfit it to, hey, I was looking for that.
It's true.
Okay? Nothing beats that big controlled experiment.
Yeah, I take the general point. I think the general point is correct, and it is a very Hayekian point, that trial and error. It's also related to some of the work on entrepreneurship by Kerzner, that trial and error is extremely important, that you don't just sit around and figure out the right thing to do, that entrepreneurship is very much a hit-and-miss process. You throw a lot of things out there, and some things work that you couldn't have predicted in advance.
Yes.
It's not unrelated to the stories you tell in the book about blockbuster movies and blockbuster books. As you know, I'm sure from the publishing business, they're not very good at predicting what books are going to succeed. There's a handful, maybe each year, that they're pretty sure are going to do well. But if you look at the best books, they're not the most successful books. They're not the ones that were predicted in advance. Same is true for movies. You cite the interesting work of Arthur Devaney, economist. Has done some very interesting work on this. But if you're not careful, you could conclude from this kind of. I find this very interesting, by the way. I like it a lot. But if you're not careful, one might conclude from your worldview that, quote, everything is luck. Everything is random. So give me the qualifiers.
Okay, let me tell you what I call it the problem of separability. Okay, you cannot separate cause and effect that easily. Okay, and everything goes back to things that are very annoying that have dominated Western thought ever since Aristotle. Wrote about it. Mostly Al-Farabi. Okay, who's the guy who synthesized Aristotle. Okay, with all his layers of causations. The problem is very separability. If I need to wear a tie in order to become a banker, okay, does it mean that wearing a tie, okay, caused my banking success? No. Okay,
correct.
So we tend to have these the problems identifying the necessary from the causal. Okay,
yes.
It is necessary to do research to find something.
Yes.
Okay, so and in full randomness, I said most people don't understand it. Tell me, well, this guy was like, no, you are. I'm not saying the absence of scales. If A implies B, okay,
right,
you have to be careful when you make an inference whether non-B implies non-A.
Correct.
Right? Okay, you see, or whether B implies A.
But as you point out, most people have trouble keeping those things separate. So when you say that it's hard to distinguish skill from luck, they do tend to leap to the conclusion, therefore, all success is lucky, which is not your view.
It's not my view. Let me give you the discussion of Chapter 4 about the confirmation bias, in which I discuss something, a fallacy I call the round-trip fallacy. Okay, and it's as follows: if I tell you that all terrorists are Muslim, which is not true, and incidentally, I'm not Muslim, so if all terrorists are Muslim, all right? Assuming, okay, that statement were true, people are very likely to mistake it for all Muslims are terrorists.
Correct. That's a common intellectual leap.
Sorry?
That's a common intellectual leap, which is not true.
In Mediocristan, or in an environment that correlates to Mediocristan, these are inconsequential. If you say all tigers are killers and all killers are tigers, all right, the difference is not a big deal. Okay, to get by.
Right.
In a complex environment, that fallacy can multiply your odds by 20,000. All right. So, or you make the mistake. So most people, if I tell you that all discoveries came from luck, all right, doesn't mean that all luck will produce, all luck will produce discoveries, or it doesn't mean that all will come from luck. Okay.
And it
so
doesn't
here we have a lot of round trips that people make that are not warranted. My statement is as follows. You need, as the great Pasteur said, you need to make your own luck, okay? And we know pretty much how to make it. In the book business, and I'm now part of the book business, unfortunately to know it a little better, now I have a book that will be in the bookstores tomorrow. So in the book business, they realize they can't predict a single bestseller. But you know what? Look at the structure of the ownership of the book business. Okay, Bertelsmann would buy anything that prints text with a hardcover on it. Okay, Okay, they will buy anything. Random House, Knopf, all these are owned by Bertelsmann. Okay, why? They realize, hey, if you have enough of these diversity, so therefore, if you have a high sample of trials, we're going to get something. Okay.
You let the market.
Not necessarily a book. Okay, it's not just random. A book needs to have sentences in it.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have there's necessary elements. So what I said about about the problem of making an inference from the necessary and to the causal, mistaking it, is to me is not well developed in the book because I didn't have the time. I tried to develop in the footnotes. Well, it was still I didn't have the time. Okay, but I'm gonna sometimes explore it more psychologically in my new project. The project I'm running with Dan Goldstein on research in what I call the non-ludic in ecological uncertainty.
Explain that.
Okay. One of the central distinctions I make in this book is in statistics. Okay. Aside from mediocristan, extremistan, I have what I call the ludic and the non-ludic domain. Okay, what is ludic? It's simply a world of games. It's a world in which you take the rules for granted and you work within the rules. So induction works, the classical induction. Logical rules apply because it's like when you go into an IQ test, you don't doubt the questions. You don't say, well, maybe the experimenter is lying. You don't say that. You just take for granted that these questions are right, okay, and you try to find the answer, okay? When you go to a casino, you don't have to worry about the casino playing a trick on you, okay? This is what I call ludic, a ludic environment.
Okay, so the rules of the game are clear, and cause and effect is clear, I think.
Where you don't have any uncertainty concerning the rules, no ambiguity, or what people call ambiguity, all right?
Okay.
Okay, you know it's pretty much that the rules are there and stable, okay? And then I have what I call open market uncertainty, or what I call ecological uncertainty, where you're not sure about the rules. You don't know where the random variables are. You don't know who the enemy is. You don't know what's going on. Okay. This is what I call real-world uncertainty, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, of course, real-world uncertainty can be mediocristan, but it's mostly extremistan, okay?
Right.
And it's all very, very rare, except in poker, okay? It's very rare to have games, okay, associated with extremistan, okay? Limit poker is definitely mediocristan, okay?
Okay.
No limit poker, will sort of like will be ludic and extremistan. That's the only exception I found. Okay. So you have that dichotomy, ludic and non-ludic, and I'm very interested in studying our behavior in what I call ecological world. How do we make inferences? Okay.
What do you mean by an ecological world?
Ecological world is a world in which, for example, let me give you the psychological tests that were done in the past, okay? Do you want to go to Rome or do you want to go to London, okay? How many times in life do you have to face these two questions? You don't. The laboratory contraptions.
Correct.
Typically, you want to go to Rome or nothing, or you're going to go to London or buy a car, okay? This is how the real world works,
right?
Okay? The real world, nobody comes to you and say, you have 1% probability of buying this. You don't know the probabilities in finance. You don't know the probabilities in economic decisions. You never know the probabilities outside of casino. Even then, you don't know the probabilities, okay? Fully well, you see?
Agreed.
So this is what I call ludic versus non-ludic. And it's tragic that I'm standing in a study, I describe it now, okay, where I told you I have all these statistical books, and they're all ludic.
Right.
Okay, I have a full wall of them. I'm standing in front of it.
Right.
The processes, they're all ludic. Okay?
The processes that generate the numbers in our samples are mechanistic in some dimension.
Mechanistic and known.
Right.
Like Arrow de Breu is ludic, all right? Economics is largely ludic, all right? Or not your economics, the other.
Right.
Okay.
Well, the Hayekian, it's what's so interesting about, I have to say this for the readers who go to the book, the two books are really quite spectacular. Economists take a beating in the books.
Not you guys.
No, I know, but
I have a footnote saying by economists, I don't mean these Hayekians. The
I understand.
Guys, right?
No, you like Hayek, and you critique
and Shackle, especially Shackle,
and you critique the mathematical, the sterility and scientism of mathematical economics.
I do more than critique. You know what I call them?
What do you call them?
Who's going to be very good at a ludic game? Very, very good at a ludic game when the rules are very clear.
Who?
An idiot savant.
An idiot savant, yeah.
All right. So I'm not shy. I know. Listen, I know. I got a phone call, all right, saying that there are a lot of articles now going to attack me.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of not. I'm going to facing them, and I'm not worried because I know I'm right. But I mean, it is. But they don't. What they don't like is the idiot savant part, and I know I'm right about it.
Well, I like. Well, particularly in finance. But I just have to say this for listeners who may be confused. One of my pet peeves is people who confuse economics with finance, economics with money. And there is a part of economics, a branch of economics that deals with money and deals with finance. And you argue in the book that branch of economics is intellectually bankrupt, basically, because of its application of Gaussian techniques to a non-Gaussian world, the use of equilibrium techniques in a non-equilibrium world.
An unknown equilibrium world.
An unknown equilibrium.
Yeah, you don't know it may exist, but you don't know it, which is the same thing, right?
Which is it's even worse, I'd say.
Yeah.
So I'm very sympathetic to that critique, but I think, as you point out, I think we might need a different name for the kind of economists that you and I are more partial to, the ones who are the economists who see knowledge as a vast, unknowable landscape. In particular, there's a wonderful paper we've mentioned before on EconTalk, a very, very short paper. I think it's under 3 pages.
Is it the Böttke paper?
No, it's. Well, you can tell me about that in a second, but it's by a colleague, James Buchanan, who won a Nobel Prize in economics. And he argues in there that much of economics is we take these data points called prices or preferences or the people involved in this game that we could be talking about, and we then say, well, let's see if we can find an optimum for this set of data. Let's find out what allocation of goods and services make these people the happiest. That's a standard exercise in modern economics. And Buchanan's point is that the prices and the preferences often emerge from the process itself of trying to do well in life. And to take those as given data points is absurd. Sterile isn't the right word for it. So I think you're getting at that somewhat when you talk about this ludic, non-ludic. Ludic is Ludic.
It comes from games.
So that distinction is a very powerful, potentially very interesting distinction that, as economists, we want to be like physicists. So we want to say, okay, we have planet A and planet B, and let's predict their orbit. Or we have economy A and economy B, let's predict their growth rate over the next 5 years. And they're not the same. Those are not the same exercises. Because they're sentient agents, sentient beings, humans, who are actually in an unknowing, imperfect world, where, as you say, not only do they not know the data out there, we don't even know what the data might be. So in that world of imperfect information, to posit a world that we could know of perfect information is slightly absurd.
There was an article I cite there, okay, and I say that every year or so there's an article that say that every couple of years there's an article, starting with Hayek's Nobel lecture, The Pretense of Knowledge. There's an article that basically complains about the point. And
complains about which point? About which point?
Sorry?
Complains about which point?
It complains about that ludic, and of course it uses different language, doesn't use the word ludic fallacy. It complains about the mathematization of economics used to basically show off mathematical skills by people who are not really mathematically, typically they're not good mathematicians, right? So they even have to do more of it, okay? So, and the last paper came from one of your colleagues called Lowly Philosophers of High Priests.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and I quoted it in the Black Swan. I read it. I said, okay, this is another of these papers. I want to cite it now and look at what happened to it 10 years from now. And sure enough, it's going to be forgotten because it is not proposing something. All right.
Who wrote that paper?
Your colleague, Peter Böttke.
Oh, Pete Böttke, yeah.
Böttke, you pronounce. Okay.
Sure.
You're right. And more, to support your point, there's a gentleman called Shackle,
mm-hmm.
for whom economics was unknowledge.
Sure.
Shackle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you can't. Nobody knows who Shackle is.
No, he doesn't. And Hayek himself is although I'm thrilled that he's still known, is not known as I wish he were. And you also cite one of our favorites here at EconTalk and the Library of Economics and Liberty, which is Bastiat, who, as you say, is not a Frenchman who is not often referred to in his home country, but who understood this distinction between the seen and the unseen and how important that is. Yeah,
Bastiat I'm trying to revive Bastiat in French, and I'm working on my French translation, or I'm going to have a lot more Bastiat.
Hear, hear.
Sorry?
How's it going?
The French translation?
Well, what do you mean in French translation?
The Black Swan. The Black Swan discusses Bastiat.
Right.
Okay? But the French edition of the Black Swan is going to be different, because given that I have trouble with translators, so I usually change the book.
So you're going to have
I let them translate the book, then I go change things. I don't have to stick to the text, given that I'm the author.
So the French version of the Black Swan will have more Bastiat in it?
It'll have a lot more Bastiat in it, yes.
Excellent.
Okay.
Excellent.
It has a lot more Bastiat and also the other heroes, Bishop Huet, who discovered the Kahneman-Tversky problems, before these guys, said how we are born. Another person called Simon Fouché, he explains to you how we tend to be dogmatic. So he said that people tend to theorize first, think later, all right?
Sure.
And then observe last, okay? That tendency we have to, it takes less effort to make a theory than to have none.
Yes.
Okay, so we're falling, for that trap of making theories because it's the easiest thing to do, and doubting is the hardest thing to do.
Yeah.
So, what's the name of that profession? Is it economics? I would like, if you find a name for that profession, all right?
Well, I like how you call Hayek a philosopher rather than economist.
I call him a philosopher because, I said, unfortunately, he's called an economist. He's a philosopher. He was of some influence on Karl Popper.
Yes.
He resembles Karl Popper. I would say in some respect he's much deeper than Karl Popper. His ideas are his own, okay, Hayek, whereas I discovered that a lot of the things about falsification were not just Popper, you see, or John Stuart Mill, and of course I discovered a bunch of Frenchmen, okay, that nobody knows about, even in France, called Victor Brochard, all right, who were obsessed with falsification, you see. There was a class of French. So Popper isn't as much the Popper that we think he is, and Hayek is a lot more of the philosopher that Popper should be.
Well, unfortunately, I think I've often thought about a different name for myself and my colleagues who have similar leanings than economists, so that people would not confuse us with stock market analysts or other forms of shamanism. But it's a philosopher, political economists used to be what we were called, the people who tried to meld the different flavors of social science. Adam Smith was not interested in money particularly. He's somewhat interested in it, but he wrote a glorious book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which is about human nature. It's not about the stock market. It's not about gross domestic product or interest rates. And it's a shame that our field has lost that. But just having a name for it would be a good starting point. Philosopher is good. I like philosopher.
You guys started as moral philosophers, okay?
Yeah.
And eventually, it should be something back in philosophy, and relevant philosophy. And at the end of the Black Swan, I go after analytical philosophy.
Yeah, I like that. I got a kick out of that.
See? They worry about the uncertainty. Okay, you see, for example, when people hear the word uncertainty, immediately associate it with the greater uncertainty principle. So this is the uncertainty of idiot savants. Okay, it's the uncertainty of quantum mechanics. All right, it's Gaussian, okay, or near Gaussian, or definitely mediocristan. It's not extremistan. Okay?
Well, but so here's the question: you and I, let's say, we've never met before.
Yes.
And we've never spoken, and I'm I can't imagine this, but for some reason I'm in New York and I'm on the Upper East Side at a very extraordinarily fitted out apartment looking over Central Park, and there's a bunch of witty, intelligent people there, and wise people and glamorous people, and I go over to get a single malt scotch, not a scotch, but a single malt scotch. And you're getting, I don't know what you're getting.
I only drink, I have ascetic habits. I only drink ouzo, Greek ouzo, or Lebanese arak, or French pastis.
Okay, so you're having some arak, and you turn to me and say, so what do you do? And I say, well, I'm a moral philosopher. Now, for you, your face would light up and you'd say, oh, really? And we'd start a conversation. The average person will slink off I'm afraid, is going to slink off to the corner with no conversation in between. Do you think this is going to work?
Yeah, but let me tell you, whenever if you tell people, hey, I'm an economist or I'm in finance, okay,
that's a nightmare.
Automatically going to ask you what you think the market will do
tomorrow,
or if you have stock tips, okay?
Yeah, I know, they do.
So you're better off telling them that. My technique, as I say in the Black Swan, is whenever people ask me what I do for a living, I tell them I'm a limo driver, so they leave you alone.
I like that a lot too. Limo driver. I used to do. I do the lawn work is always good. But limo driver is good, and they do leave you alone. But if you want to have an interesting conversation,
yes,
economist is a conversation ender as well, but moral philosopher might do better. I might try that.
Definitely. I mean, I tell you, I think most people would rather have a discussion with a philosopher than with an economist. But the word a friend of mine coined for me, he said you should describe yourself as an empirical philosopher.
Oh, that's nice. I like that too.
Because you're not dealing with consciousness or metaphysics. You're dealing with applied problems in a philosophical with a philosophical bent. So it has some. Philosophy is supposed to be non-empirical. You see,
right?
But you're bringing some empiricism there. Let me add 2 or 3 things.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, I think what I've done with the Black Swan, is try to bring some statistical argument against statistics itself.
I think that's correct.
Yeah, so which is why philosophers don't use empirical argument. I use empirical argument by saying, if I want to tell you that all of statistics is junk, all I have to give you is one example, that dominates all the tales. You see? All you need is one simple example to show that the theory doesn't work.
Well,
so you don't even have to provide statistics. Just one simple incident, can prove the theory wrong.
Well, I love the story you tell about the casino. I think most people would say, well, casino's an easy way to make money because all the risks are destroyed by the large numbers. You just have enough people come in and gamble. Sure, you'll have some people who win a lot, but you have people who lose a lot. It's a money machine. And what's the biggest risk you face? Well, there isn't any really, because as long as you have enough customers. I mean, if you have 3 customers, sure, you could lose money. But tell what's the biggest source of money loss for the casino that you were looking at?
It was. I mean, they lost. I think the yearly variations were almost non-existent
in their take from gambling.
Business,
yeah,
because of a lot of large numbers.
But
they lost. The first one is they had. It's called Siegfried and Roy. They had one of the performers was attacked by a lion.
Yeah, by a tiger, I think.
By a tiger. Okay, yeah. And the tiger grew up in the same bedroom.
Yeah, and he mauled him, and they got.
It was an outlier.
And they got sued, right?
And then they had to deal with it. They had to deal with the losses because they had no other show. So you have, you had to bring another show, and it takes a long time to have a show.
Did they get sued also?
And they got sued, of course. They had all kind of problems. They lost, I don't know, somewhere close to $100 million.
Right. So that's to me, it's not the most entertaining example in the book, but it's a beautiful. There are many more entertaining examples, but it's a beautiful example of how the risk that's involved is outside your perception.
This is what I call the tunneling problem, you see?
Yes.
Yeah, but they also, that was not the only case. They had 4 other problems of almost equal magnitude.
That had nothing to do with gambling, yeah.
That had nothing to do with being a casino.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. So what else so you're using statistics to fight statistics?
Yeah, by showing, by showing that if, epistemologically, I think that we need to use something I call the power laws, okay? And power laws have one problem. They cannot calibrate.
Now, what do you mean by that?
Okay, in other words, with the Gaussian has what I call the self-referential problem, and it's as follows. The Gaussian will tell you itself how much data you need, okay, to be certain about its parameters.
Right.
Okay. It's the only distribution of that class of distribution, okay, is the only situation in statistics where you encounter, self-reference, and it's self-reference that makes it work. Let me give you an example, okay? Say you have data, okay? You want to decide what probability distribution, okay?
Mm-hmm.
You have to use data to discover what probability distribution you have, no?
Right.
Okay. Now, how do you know if you have enough data, from a probability distribution? Okay, so you need data to discover the probability distribution, and you need
you need that to know how much data you need.
Exact probability distribution to know how much data. It's exactly like asking someone, "Are you a liar?" Okay, or "Are you say the truth?"
Yeah, right.
And the Gaussian tells you, "Well, I say the truth." Okay, if you have X number of data, then you can say then I can tell you I am a Gaussian. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that problem of self-reference is very acute.
Yes.
Okay. I have a few things on my site that explain the magnitude of the errors that you can have when you have non-Gaussian. Okay.
Okay.
But one thing is for certain, it's not easy to discover the properties or calibrate a power law, something called the power law, okay, which is exactly opposite spectrum. Most of extremistan is represented by what I call power laws, okay?
Okay.
You cannot find the parameters very easily, and for some calibrations, you need a high number of data, okay? So the distribution don't tell you how much you need to accept. In other words, they don't examine themselves. It's a little complicated, but it's a very potent mathematical argument I use there.
Okay.
As foundation for skepticism. First, I can show it's not Gaussian, okay? It's very easy to see that data is not Gaussian, okay? Now, the second point is, if it's not Gaussian, the answer is not easy.
Agreed.
Okay, this is sort of the message of the book. You can use some classes of distributions to sort of get an idea of your sensitivity to model error, but you cannot use them to make precise predictions. And that's the tragedy, of course, of chaos theory. Chaos theory, people thought, hey, we're going to use chaos theory to build better models. No. If chaos theory tells you something, it is that you cannot build models. And you saw in a chapter of Poincaré the projection of errors over time, how bad it can be in a nonlinear world.
Well, I enjoyed that. Although I have to say, I again, as an economist who takes a more biological, organic, emergent Hayekian approach, I'm very sympathetic to the argument that of the what I call the and you call the n-body problem, or the n-billiard ball problem.
Yes.
When you have a two-body problem is pretty feasible in physics. It can be somewhat feasible in economics. When you have a modern economy with n people bouncing around off each other, the level of complexity is sufficiently high that, again, you get the Hayekian problem that we don't have enough. There's no way of capturing the full body of knowledge we'd need to organize that society from the top down. It has to be a bottom-up solution. It has to be an unplanned, not centrally planned solution. So I'm very sympathetic to that.
I see.
But I don't think you want to argue that therefore we can't predict anything, right?
No,
Again,
I'm not saying we can't predict anything. First of all, the first statement I'm making here is a lot of people claim that they're good predictors are in fact not good predictors, and you have all the papers I cite. Okay, I did the meta-analysis, right? You have 1,200 references in there, so of which a large number concerns the prediction problem. Okay. The second one is that when you predict a variable for 25 years, okay, in a nonlinear world, your error is not going to be twice or three times the error of 1 year prediction. It's going to be more like several trillion times the error. And people don't realize that.
Yeah, no,
the degradation of your forecasting through time is monstrous. And the third problem is psychological, is that people would like to predict, okay, for them it is more therapy than anything else, okay?
Yeah.
So there's no problem making a prediction if, number one, you have a handle of your error rate. Two, you know that the side effect of making a prediction is that it's gonna lower your anxiety, therefore make you more of a sucker, okay, for a black swan.
Mm-hmm.
And number three, okay, you test, okay, you look at your error after the fact. I gave the example of the government predicting oil prices 25 years down the road at $27 a barrel, and then 6 months later they had to double their forecast. And it didn't hit them that if you have to double your forecast 6 months into a 25-year forecast, 6 months into its life, okay, that there's something a little strange about your prediction.
Maybe you don't really understand the underlying process.
Or maybe you should not. You should tell people, this is my prediction. Let me give you another example of where you can use forecast error as central to decision making. And it's more important than the forecast. If I'm going to Nice, France, the weather's going to be 65 degrees, okay? Fahrenheit, of course. Okay, plus or minus 10 degrees. I know what the size of the suitcase I need to carry there, okay, to be protected for all weather conditions, okay?
Right.
But if I'm going to go to Mars, where it's going to be 65 degrees plus or minus 1,000 degrees, my suitcase will have to be considerably larger, no?
Correct.
So your forecast error matters in some cases, when it's high, more than the forecast.
Yes.
I didn't realize it. There's an old trader saying, don't cross a river if it's on average 4 feet deep.
Correct.
Okay, so this is not ingrained. So in other words, a lot of things we can do if you start saying we're fallible and we're not good with knowledge, we're human aren't good with knowledge. I mean, that's what Socrates tried to do. Okay, well, all I'm saying here is a footnote on Socrates, on his last spiel in the Apology, right? Where he said the difference between him, he may know more than I do, but I know what I don't know better than he does. That's sort of what he said.
Now, ignorance is a very powerful, valuable trait to embrace at the right time.
Yeah, because there's situations. In finance, I recommend, I say, okay, if instead of thinking you know it, okay, you say, I don't know it, but you can realize that there's some degrees in your ignorance, okay? And there's things that are more robust to forecast errors than others. Just like the portfolio I was discussing is more robust to the black swan. Some situations are more robust to forecast errors, you see?
Yes, and that's...
And yes.
No, go ahead.
And in a rebuttal now I'm writing, because of course I'm attacked left and right, and when a Nobel wants to attack you, it's always nice because then you can write a rebuttal. The other, you see,
it's good for sales too.
Yeah, okay. And I'm writing the following: is that the problem we have? Of course, we inherited it from the Enlightenment. It's not just the economists; it's the Enlightenment. Okay. Because before the Enlightenment, you have really very, 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 very good thinkers that are completely, outside our consciousness. Look what the French did to Bastiat. They did that to many more thinkers, okay? Bastiat luckily survived because of America, but you have a lot of thinkers. Okay, anyway, so everything is probably summarized with Marx saying, he said, I want to turn knowledge into action, okay? I don't want to be sterile philosophers like you, okay? And he was talking to Hegel, sort of indirectly, via his thesis on Feuerbach. And the statement I'm making is, I want to do the opposite. I wanted to turn a lack of knowledge into action. Okay, and this to me is summarizes the difference between the Enlightenment and what we should be doing. You see, it's build an economy, a society along lines that are conscious of its ignorance. Okay.
Yeah, it would be a better world if we embraced I don't know when in fact we don't know. But
and we have a tableau here, and I try to do a tableau. Who is a pseudo expert and where's the expert? We pretty much know that domains that are Gaussian have experts.
Yes.
And domains that are nonlinears don't quite have experts.
Yeah, but we like experts. There's a demand for them. There's a taste for them. We really want to be assured of how the world works. So we always have the potential to be fooled by those experts. Well, we're out of time. My guest today has been Nassim Taleb, author of Fooled by Randomness and the Black Swan. Thank you, Nassim, for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's a delight.
This is EconTalk, part of the Library of Economics and Liberty. For more EconTalk, go to econtalk.org, where you can also comment on today's podcast and find links and readings related to today's conversation. The sound engineer for EconTalk is Rich Goyette. I'm your host, Russ Roberts. Thanks for listening. Talk to you on Monday.